You learned fast in prison that silence is safer than questions. Not because questions are forbidden, because the wrong question can turn the room against you. Your first week inside, you think information is protection. You think if you understand the rules, if you learn how people move, where they sit, who talks to who, you can avoid problems. You believe awareness keeps you safe. That belief comes from the outside world, where asking questions is normal. In here, questions are signals. Every word is a signal. Every pause is a signal. Every glance is a signal. The unit you're placed in is loud without being loud. Voices overlap, metal scrapes against concrete, shoes drag across the floor. It feels chaotic, but after a few hours you realize it isn't. There's a rhythm to the noise, a pattern. Some voices carry farther than others. Some laughs stop conversations around them. Some men move freely between tables. Others don't move at all unless they have to. You start watching because watching feels safer than speaking. Your cellmate tells you to keep your head up, but your mouth closed. He doesn't explain why. He doesn't have to. The way he says it makes you understand that this isn't advice, it's survival shorthand. You notice one man always eats alone. Same table, same seat, same time. No one sits across from him, no one brushes past him, no one touches his tray. It isn't respect, it isn't fear, it's distance. The kind of distance people give to something they don't understand. You don't mean to focus on him, your eyes just keep finding him. Humans look for patterns when they're afraid. He's a pattern that doesn't fit. One afternoon in the day room, you end up sitting 2 tables away from him. You didn't choose that seat because you wanted to be near him. You chose it because it was empty and your legs were tired of standing. Your body makes the decision before your mind catches up. You sit, you look down, you pretend to read the board with outdated notices no one checks anymore. Your eyes flick up once. He's there. Same posture, same slow movements. He eats like he's alone, even though he isn't. You tell yourself not to speak. You hear your cellmate's voice in your head. Head up, mouth closed. But silence gets heavy when you're new. Silence makes you feel invisible, and invisibility feels like weakness. Weakness feels like danger. So you break it. Not loudly, not with confidence. You say it the way you'd say it outside. Casual, low. Hey, what are you in for? You don't hear a record scratch. The room doesn't go quiet. That would be dramatic. This is worse. Conversations continue, but they thin out. Voices shorten. Laughter cuts off faster than usual. The air shifts in a way you can't name yet. The man looks at you, not angry, not surprised, curious, like you've stepped onto a wire and nothing has happened yet, but something might. "Why you askin'?" he says. You smile because smiling feels like a shield. "Just making conversation." He nods slowly. "That's not conversation in here." He looks back down to his tray. You wait for something else to happen, a threat, a warning, a reaction. Nothing comes. The world keeps moving. Someone shouts across the room about the TV. A domino slams against concrete. You tell yourself you imagined the tension, but you feel it in your chest anyway. That night in the unit, your cellmate doesn't look at you when he speaks. You asked him what he's in for. Your stomach tightens. You didn't tell anyone. "How do you know?" you ask. He shrugs like the answer doesn't matter. People watch. You lie back on your bunk and stare at the ceiling. The light hums. Somewhere down the tier, a door slams. You feel exposed in a way you can't explain. "He's not on paperwork," your cellmate continues. "Not on stories, not on rumors." You don't understand what that means yet. That's the kind of man you don't ask questions about. The words sit in the air between you, heavy. Your mind reaches for logic. You didn't ask about his case file. You didn't ask for details. You ask the same question everyone asks on the outside. What are you in for? It's small, it's normal. Normal doesn't exist here. The next day, you notice small changes. Two guys you've been nodding at stop nodding back. Not hostile, not cold, neutral, like you've shifted from known to unknown. In prison, unknown is dangerous. At lunch, the seat next to you stays empty longer than usual, not because people don't want to sit, because no one chooses it. You feel the absence more than you'd feel a shove. You reply the question in your head, the tone, the timing, the way you smiled. You tell yourself you didn't mean anything by it. Intention doesn't matter here. Interpretation does. You didn't break a rule, you broke a signal. In here, asking "what are you in for" does three things. It tells people you're curious about their past. It tells people you don't understand the present. And it tells people you might talk. The man you asked wasn't offended. He was flagged. People noticed you noticed him. That's enough to change how they read you. 2 days later, you're in line for chow. The smell of food is thin and metallic. Someone behind you leans in just enough for you to hear him. Don't ask that again. You don't turn around. You don't answer. You stare at the back of the head in front of you and let the moment pass you through. That's the first correct move you've made since you arrived. Because prison isn't about what's allowed, it's about what's read. And some questions don't get answers, they get consequences.
You start noticing how information moves in prison. Not in straight lines, not in conversations, in looks, in pauses, in who stands where when someone else enters a room. After that one question, the room doesn't change loudly, it changes quietly. People don't confront you, they reposition around you. That's how the system corrects mistakes. Not with punishment first, with distance. You become careful with your eyes. You learn to keep them level, not searching. Looking too curious is the same as speaking too much. Curiosity suggests hunger for information. Hunger for information suggests loose boundaries. Loose boundaries suggest risk. You didn't know that before. Now you start learning it in pieces. In the showers, steam hangs in the air like fog. Sound bounces off tile. Conversations are clipped, half-finished. You hear your name once, not spoken to you, about you. Low enough that it might not be meant for you to hear. High enough that it probably is. New guy asked questions. No name, no details, just that. The man next to you adjusts his towel and steps slightly away. Not dramatic, just enough to change the distance between you. Space is communication here. No one teaches you that. You feel it before you understand it. You start eating faster again. You catch yourself. You slow down. Slowing down too late still reads as nervous. You don't know how to move yet without performing. Performance draws attention. Attention draws tests. You haven't been tested openly yet. That's worse. Open tests come with clear stakes. Silent ones come with invisible scores. One afternoon, you're sitting in the day room when a man drops into the seat across from you without asking. He doesn't look at you. He stares at the wall behind your head. People think you're trying to figure out stories, he says. You don't answer. You remember your cellmate's voice, head up, mouth closed. You not from here? He continues. You still don't answer. He nods like he's talking to himself. Figures. He stands up and leaves. That was a test. Not because he threatened you, because he wanted to see if you'd explain yourself. Explanation is weakness here, not morally, structurally. Explanation means you feel the need to justify your presence. People who justify get managed. You're starting to understand that prison isn't violent all the time. It's interpretive all the time.
Every movement is interpreted. Every word is interpreted. Even silence is interpreted. The question you asked wasn't dangerous because of what it meant to you. It was dangerous because of what it suggested to everyone else. You were trying to build context. Context building is surveillance behavior. Not official surveillance, social surveillance. The kind that tells people you're mapping the room. People who map the room are unpredictable. Unpredictable people get contained. That's the logic.
Your cellmate finally explains one night while you're both lying in the dark. There are only 3 reasons to ask what someone's in for, he says quietly. You're trying to size them up, you're trying to connect, or you're trying to collect. You wait. All 3 get you watched. You turn on your side. So what do you talk about? You ask. He exhales through his nose, almost a laugh. You talk about what's in front of you. Food, TV, time, nothing that reaches backward, nothing that reaches forward, nothing that creates leverage. You think about the man you asked, how he didn't react, how the room reacted for him. You realize the danger wasn't that you put him on the spot. The danger was that you drew attention to a man who had chosen to exist without attention. Some people in prison survive by being known. Some survive by being unclassified. You disrupted that. 2 days later, you see him again in the yard. He's standing alone, looking through the fence like the fence might eventually blink. You don't look at him. You don't move toward him. You don't pretend he isn't there. You let your body stay neutral. He turns his head slightly. "Don't talk to me again," he says. No anger, no threat, instruction. You nod once and look away. That nod is neutral. You've learned that much. Later, someone else sits next to you on the bench. Different man, different energy. "You did a dumb thing," he says. You don't respond. "You did a dumb thing," he continues. "Not unforgivable, just dumb." He stands up and walks off. That's the closest thing to mercy you felt since you got here. You're learning the hierarchy of mistakes. There are mistakes that get corrected with silence. There are mistakes that get corrected with pressure. There are mistakes that get corrected with violence. You made a silence mistake. Silence mistakes don't hurt immediately. They isolate you slowly. Isolation is dangerous because it removes witnesses. People with no witnesses are easier to move, easier to test, easier to push. You start practicing being boring. You sit where you're told. You eat at a steady pace. You don't linger. You don't rush. You let conversations pass you over like weather. You realize prison rewards predictability more than strength. Predictable people don't disrupt patterns. Patterns keep the unit stable. Stability is safety, not for you, for the system. One night you hear yelling down the tier. You don't look. You keep your eyes on the wall. Looking is participation. Participation is classification. The next morning, the man who yelled isn't in the unit. No one explains where he went. That's how lessons move in prison, not through explanation, through disappearance. You finally understand the weight of that first question. It wasn't curiosity, it was exposure. You exposed yourself as someone who didn't know which questions were safe. And in prison, safety is less about protection. It's about knowing what not to touch.
You start understanding that time works differently in prison. Not slower, not faster, thicker. Minutes don't pass, they stack. A quiet hour can feel heavier than a loud fight because nothing breaks the weight of it. Silence presses on you. You begin to measure time by routines instead of clocks. Chow, count, yard, lockdown. The repetition starts erasing your sense of before and after. Everything becomes now and again. You learn to recognize the sounds that mean nothing and the sounds that mean everything. Keys that jingle casually mean a guard is just passing. Keys that stop moving mean someone is about to be addressed. Footsteps that pause outside your cell mean attention. Attention is never neutral. One afternoon, during rec time, you sit on the edge of the yard bench. You're not hiding, you're not inviting, you're existing. A man you've seen before stands nearby, stretching his shoulders like he's warming up. He's not exercising, he's calibrating his presence. You recognize the posture now. People do that before they test boundaries. He doesn't look at you. You ever been in a fight? He asks the air. You don't answer. Not asking you to brag, he continues, just asking if you know how things end. You keep your eyes forward. You breathe slow. You let the question pass through you like wind. He finally looks at you. Good, he says. That look means you learn fast. He walks away. That was another test. Not a challenge, a probe. You're beginning to see the pattern. Prison tests are often invitations to misread situations. The system doesn't want you strong. It wants you predictable. Strength that surprises creates instability. Predictability allows containment. Later that day, you see a man get into an argument over a seat. Not shouting, just two men standing too close, voices low. The energy around them tightens. The room shifts. People stop moving. Even the guards slow their steps. You feel the temperature of the space change. Then one man steps back. Not because he's afraid, because he understands timing. The argument dissolves without resolution. Both men walk away in opposite directions. Nothing happened. Everything happened.
You start noticing how conflicts resolve before they begin. Prison violence is less about rage and more about rhythm. People who last learn when to step forward and when to step back without making either move obvious. You're still obvious sometimes. You still freeze for a fraction of a second when someone addresses you. You still think before you respond. Thinking is visible here. Visible thinking suggests uncertainty. Uncertainty attracts attention. One night, your cellmate finally looks at you and speaks directly. You're trying to learn the rules like this place is a game, he says, tapping his temple. It's not a game, it's weather. You don't solve weather, you move with it. You don't reply. You keep trying to understand people, he continues. That's not how you survive. You let people understand you less. That sentence sits with you. Let people understand you less. You start practicing not being legible. You don't react when someone bumps past you. You don't acknowledge small provocations. You don't explain yourself. Your face becomes neutral, not hard, not soft, empty enough that people can't read intent. That's when the prison begins to loosen its grip on you slightly. Not in kindness, in indifference. Indifference is the closest thing to safety here. One morning, during count, a guard pauses at your cell longer than usual. He looks at you, then at your cellmate, then at you again. "You two good?" he asks. "Yes, sir," your cellmate replies. The guard nods and moves on. Nothing about the exchange is threatening, but you feel your chest release tension you didn't know you were holding. You realize that the system is always reading pairs, groups, patterns. It doesn't care about you individually. It cares about the stability of arrangements. Two men who don't create noise together are a stable unit. Stability is rewarded with invisibility. You begin to understand why some men become ghosts in prison, not because they're weak, because they've learned to exist without disturbing patterns. You remember the first 10 minutes, how everything you did created ripples. You were loud without speaking. Now you're learning to be quiet without disappearing. The difference matters. Late one evening, as the unit settles, your cellmate speaks again, softer this time.
You can't erase your first impression, he says, but you can bury it under consistency. You stare at the wall. How long, you ask? He shrugs. Long enough that people stop remembering the old version of you. You think about that, about how identity in prison isn't fixed, it's updated, slowly, through repetition, through not breaking rhythm. That's when you realize the first 10 minutes didn't decide everything. They decided the starting story. The rest of your time decides whether that story stays true.
You stop counting days. Not because time passes quickly, because counting hurts. Each number reminds you that nothing has changed yet. Each number makes the distance visible. So you start measuring time by survival instead of calendars. You learn the difference between being seen and being noticed. Being seen is unavoidable. Being noticed is dangerous. You learn to walk with purpose, but without urgency. Urgency signals fear. Purpose signals control. You learn to sit without shrinking and without claiming space. Shrinking invites pressure. Claiming space invites challenge. Balance becomes your language. There is a moment, weeks in, when you realize something has shifted. No one calls you fresh anymore. No one watches your movements with open curiosity. You exist inside the flow instead of interrupting it. That doesn't mean you are safe. It means you are predictable. Predictability is how the system relaxes around you. One afternoon in the yard, you notice a new man enter the unit. You recognize the posture immediately. Hands tight, eyes moving too fast, steps slightly out of rhythm. You see your old self in him. Two men glance at each other the same way they once glanced at you. You don't say anything. You don't help him. You don't warn him. You don't interfere. Not because you don't care, because prison teaches you that intervention has a cost. You watch the first small test happen. A shoulder bump, a tray shifted, a quiet comment. You see him react too fast. The pattern begins.
That's when you understand the cruelty of the system isn't always physical. It's structural. It teaches people through friction instead of instruction. It lets mistakes teach lessons because mistakes are cheaper than education. You think about how none of this was written in any handbook. No orientation video mentioned the half-second pause. No rule book explained why nodding could be dangerous. No intake form warned you about how fast compliance reads as weakness. The prison doesn't train you. It reads you. And everyone inside learns to read you too. You realize the first 10 minutes weren't a test you passed or failed. They were a language you didn't know you were speaking. Every movement was a sentence. Every reaction was a paragraph. Every silence was punctuation. By the time you learned the grammar, you had already written the first chapter of how people understood you. That's why the first 10 minutes decide everything. Not because something violent happens, but because interpretation begins. And interpretation hardens into expectation. Expectation hardens into treatment. Treatment shapes your days. You lie on your bed at night and listen to the building breathe. Metal shifting, distant voices, the soft echo of keys. You don't feel dramatic fear anymore. You feel calculation. You plan your posture before you move. You plan your silence before you speak. You plan your presence before you enter a space. That planning becomes automatic. That automatic control becomes survival. Outside these walls, people think prison breaks men with violence. Inside these walls, you learn prison reshapes men with awareness. It teaches you that being watched changes how you exist. It teaches you that being read changes who you become. The first 10 minutes don't end after 10 minutes. They echo. They echo into how you stand, how you walk, how you choose when to look up and when to look away. And one day, long after the door first closed behind you, you realize the real sentence was not time. It was learning how to live while being constantly interpreted. That's the punishment that stays with you, even when the door opens again.